Hello, and thanks for joining me once again in the wacky world of Azure Synapse Analytics. That's right! Today is not a Spark episode, today is having a look at how we surface the data better. Now, Synapse Serverless SQL, yeah, it's a great option now that we can actually surface delta tables. And people can go to Purview, search around for the thing that they want, click, I would like to query this, please, and it'll create a little openrowset statement over that data. And we've seen that in previous videos. We're not going to rehash that. However, one of the nicer ways to work with it is to register views. So when I have a little serverless SQL database, I want to register a new view, which is just a wrapper around that openrowset over a delta table, parquet table, CSV, whatever the hell you're doing, and then make my users' lives easier so they can connect to Power BI, and Power BI go, here's all your tables, by showing all these different external views and hooking that stuff up. And that's what we've been doing on little projects. That's what we're doing in terms of getting people access to the data. If they want to go the Synapse route, then they can do that using Serverless SQL. However, that process, that going through and painstakingly adding each of the views is kind of annoying. I don't want to manually type in, here's all the views I want you to add for me. Obviously, like all the things that we do, I want to automate it. I want to have that just run. I want to have that go and do its own thing, register all my tables, and then life's easy. But how do we do that? So that's what today is. Today I'm going to show you how to create a stored proc, and to create a good old SQL Server stored proc inside Serverless SQL. We're going to use that to do some dynamic SQL to build up our create view statement. And then we can plug it into something like Data Factory. You can plug it into a Synapse pipeline, wrap it up, and then you can build that, start to automate out your serverless SQL Server or your serverless SQL pools. So pretty cool. That's what we're going to do. As always, if you're new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know down in the comments how you're getting on with Synapse, what you're currently doing and what your challenges are. And yeah, let's go and have a look at some stuff. So over here, I've got a list of tables. So good old AdventureWorksy stuff. In my lake, I've got my root, my core lake container. I've got a folder called curated, folder called AdventureWorks, and then just a load of delta tables. And these are super simple little delta tables. You got your delta log, you got some parquet, easy. So I want to create a database inside serverless, inside my Synapse Serverless SQL pool that has each of these exposed to view. What we're trying to do. So we've got Synapse set up, ready to go, ready to try and do this stuff. So I can go and I can have a view. This is what I've built previously. In fact, this is something we had a look at in a previous video when they first released the preview from being able to query delta tables. So real simple, create or alter my view. What database am I on currently? So I'm on this curated database. I've created a database that's called curated just to try and do this. I think what we might do is let's go crazy and make a new database. And we're going to call that, we're going to call that advancing curation, because that we call everything advancing because that's how we roll. Okay, so that's created a new database for me. So I can now go and use that database, and that's where I can go and create all my views. So if I refresh over here, I've got that advancing curation with nothing in it. Okay, good starting point. We can then say, well, actually, I want to be on that database. I want to be on my advancing curation. I want to create this view of taxis, and I'm just real simple. Select star from openrowset, go and find the place in my lake, use it as a delta table. Then we've seen that working before. We don't need to go crazy about that. And just trust that that syntax works. That's going to go off. Going to read through the query. It's going to work out the schema of that query. It's going to create it as a view. So over here, inside here, I'm just going to refresh this again. And we'll get that. There we go. DBO taxis with all the columns. It's gone. Read that delta table. Added it to my database. That's nice and easy. And having that script, that's a super easy script. So actually doing it manually isn't a big thing. I mean, you know, there's things that make me sad, like it's going to assume everything is a varchar. But, you know, it's fine. It works. It does expose everything in there. So the next bit is, how do we automate this thing? So we can write stored procs. So we can write a stored proc that will go and do some stuff. And there's some good examples, actually. So I'll drop this link in developing stored procs in Synapse SQL. Has some good examples in there. And actually, it's got an example that's kind of doing exactly what we want. So they've got 3 different procs in here. So create proc, drop external table if it exists, and you pass in a name as the parameter. And then inside that, again, checks if that table already exists. So it's only going to drop it if it does actually exist. Again, begins another transaction, says, well, not transaction, batch, if you will. And then says, I'm going to declare a bit of SQL. I'm going to build up a string that is describing that kind of bit of SQL we want to run. Drop external table and then slap the name in there. And then we want to go and run that SQL. And actually, that's what we're after, right? I want to programmatically make a way to encapsulate that create view statement in a way that I can call it many, many times with different parameters. So that is doing exactly what we want it to do. We can kind of just steal that and just take it as a bit of an example. We can go down here and say, well, actually, that's kind of getting close to what we'd like it to do. And then how do we go from there? How do we build that into something that we actually want to use? So let's do a create schema first. Oh God, SQL naming syntax. Ugh. Okay, so I'm gonna have create schema. These systems are gonna be lazy and use varchars everywhere. Just so I get the abuse. I know I'm gonna get some abuse for the SQL writing. Okay. Iconic namings. Oh, it's going to annoy everybody. Okay, so we're going to have a procedure called create schema. We're going to pass in the schema name, and then we're going to do something with it. So this is kind of like the first step of this. So we've got this thing. We can kind of steal this, actually. So that's fine. We're going to create that inside our particular thing. Oh, formatting. So we're going to do a quick select count from, actually, let's change this. We're going to go in schemas. We're going to say, look in sys schemas, see if my schema actually exists. I'm going to pass in that schema name. And if that turns more than 0, then we don't want to do anything. Actually, it's only if it equals 0. If it equals 0, we don't find any schemas. We want to go and create that schema. Kind of makes sense. Okay, so create schema, pass in the schema name. Does the schema exist already? If it doesn't, go and do something. So this is going to be our little bit of schema SQL that we want to write. Again, it's just writing out. And we're just going to do real simple, create schema, pass in our schema name. Then I'm going to execute that SQL. Essentially, this is just building up a string, a real simple string that's just going to tell us what it looks like. Then that's going to execute that same string. So that's the kind of thing we're building up when we're doing dynamic SQL. Let's just test out that that's working. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to take that schema SQL, and we're just going to print that schema SQL. Let's just test that that's actually doing what we need. We need to actually declare that schema name. Okay. Okay, so the schema, what are we going to call it schema? We didn't give it a schema, we put it in DBO last time. This is going to be our AdventureWorks schema. And then we hook all that together, just run that bit. That doesn't work. Didn't like that. I got an incorrect syntax. There we go, because I've not actually given that a thing. And that's going to be a varchar. Call it 50 again. Welcome to watching me fail to type. All right, cool. There we go. Real simple. Nothing crazy in there. But we can build up these SQL statements, and then we can run those SQL statements. So just to show you what that's doing inside of it. I'm going to take that. We're going to build up that schema statement. We're going to run that code. I'm actually put a print in there anyway, just for best practice, so we can actually see what it's doing inside there. Really a little message saying, I'm about to run this. There we go. So we can have that as a proc. Okay, I want to create that as a store proc. So no message back, that's fine. I can then call that proc. So if we go back over here and we have a look inside our schemas over here, see, we don't currently have that AdventureWorks schema. We can just check, so we can run this particular new store proc. See if it works. AdventureWorks, there we go. Do that, run that. That's running that store proc. It's building up some dynamic SQL. and it'll hopefully go and create my schema for me. Okay, so we can see what it did. It went, ran that create schema with AdventureWorks. And then over here, we can just do a quick refresh. Did you go and create my thing for me? Yes. Okay, so real quick, simple example saying, yes, we can use stored procedures. Yes, we can use dynamic SQL inside serverless SQL, inside one of these serverless SQL pool databases, these logical databases that we can do. And then suddenly that opens up I can do loads of stuff then. I can actually make all of this automated. I can get rid of all of that. So the challenge then, assuming that we've got the right schema and the database and all the things created, actually, how do we turn this into a giant bit of variable? How do we actually say, I want to declare a bit of SQL. I'm going to be disgust everybody with doing a Arduous Max and say, I want you to take this whole thing, as a bit of SQL. I can do wrap it in single quotes, kind of works. It's nicer than Spark, at least in that it does realize it's going across multiple lines. It actually the whole 3-quote thing. But I need to wrap these other bits, so I can just escape those bits out. I need to escape that bit out. And there we go. Easy as that. So that's now going to create this whole variable. I can do print SQL, run that. What's it going to be? And you can see it's built out as a SQL statement. So it's super, super easy to take something and convert it into dynamic SQL. And then it's just a case of actually plonking in the various bits that we need to parameterize. So I'd say we actually need to take that and have that as our lake name account. We need to take that whole bit of where it's going to live in the lake. You'd say, well, actually, that can't be anything. That's going to be our file path or lake path or whatever that happens to be. We plumb that in. So in SQL, we need to make sure that it's actually sort of concatenating these strings. We can just say that, jam it in, jam that in, jam that in. Obviously, we need up here, that's going to be our database name. It's going to be our schema name, actually. Schema name. And then it's going back in there with a little dot. And then we've got our table name. Okay, so it's starting to build up. So create or alter view, schema name, table name. As select star from, there's a place in the lake to go and get it. There's the file path. We could actually sort of parameterize that as well. You know, it doesn't have to be just for that we're doing it. We can say, I want my file format to go in there. And then up top, we need to grab all these things. Let's say I'm going to declare my schema name. That we're going to call it, what do we call it? Call it AdventureWorks. And then go through and we can create the rest of those things. So table name, a little bigger. I'm going to call this first one address because we know that's what it's called. File path. And again, needs to be probably fairly chunky. And then this one, the bit that we took off was going to be root, base, and then NYC taxi. And that's where to go and find this particular thing in the lake. So actually, let's just change it around to be taxis, because I'm going to show you how to do it properly in a second. And then we need file format. Nice and small, and that's going to be Delta. Okay, so we close that off. So we've got the various different bits and pieces that we want to jam into the SQL string. Declared them all up front. So if I just run that whole thing, oh, lake account, I called something the wrong name. Oh no, I just forgotten to actually include that one. So let's do that. We've got lake account. And that one for me is called DB Lake. Okay, cool. So that ran happily. So we get out this statement. We can kind of just make sure that statement makes sense. So that whole thing, plugging all that together, turned it into this big old thing saying, oop, create or alter my view AdventureWorks.taxis. That looks good. Select star from openrowset. All seems fine. Built up my lake path. That's good. Knows its format's Delta. That's it. All looks pretty good to me. It's going to go and create that view. It's assuming in this case that that schema already exists. Doing that. And then all we actually need to do, so once we've got that, it's just a case of actually executing that piece. So again, in that example that we had, we've got that execute SQL statement. So if we actually just take that, so exec sp execute SQL, the T-SQL that we're passing in is coming from this. In this case, we're going to pass in that SQL statement that we made. Keep doing Control Enter. F5. It's going to run that. This time, instead of printing it and just showing us what it was about to do, it's going to go and register that as a new one. It needs an end varchar, not varchar. Sorry, my bad. Okay, that's going to go off, do that, pass it through, rerun that, passing it into that execute SQL store proc. Just taking a moment because now it's actually doing the view creation, which is reading the delta table and working out the schema. So if I go and refresh over here, we should see VentureWorks.taxis, and it's gone and done it properly. It's that wasn't there before, that's being created by our dynamic SQL that's taking in all those parameters. And we can change that around. So the ones I was trying to do earlier is this curated adventure work. So that hasn't been created. We need to go and figure out how we do that. The next step, so we've built a generic script that can take some parameters, build it up into a SQL statement and create a view for us. And then turn that into not even particularly fancy store proc. So again, I was playing with it. So we just create that store procedure, calling it register view, passing in those same things that we had, schema, view name, lake account, folder path, file format. I'm doing that quick check we did at the start and saying, does the schema already exist? If the schema doesn't exist, then go and create the schema. So that way we can add new schemas on the fly. If we want to add a whole new section of curated views, we don't have to pre-build the schema. It's going to go and do that. So first step, only if it needs to, it'll generate the SQL to create the schema and it'll run that. Next, it will go off and do the exact same thing we just did, which is building out that kind of SQL to create that view, plugging in those different parameters, building out the lake path and kind of the lake account name, adding in the file format, and then it runs it. So exactly the same principles we've just built up, but now we can just call that register view. That's now just a procedure that we can call and say, I would like you to register that, please. So then that act of registering a new view is now baked down to that. So I don't think I've actually run this in my current database in this advancing curation. Let's do that. I'm going to run that store proc. Okay, so that's created that store procedure. And then we can go and have a play with it. Now, word of warning, if we're having a play with store procedures, and then you're having a look over here at this database, you're not going to see store procedures. There's no store procedures here. So it's kind of like, it's a little bit hidden away. What you can always do is your select star from sys start. Okay, so you're probably used to seeing things like sys.tables. You can go and have a look at what tables registered. You can come back and go, there's no tables. What are you talking about, you lunatic? Yeah, I'm in the wrong database, but there's still no tables there. But there is also one called sys.procedures. So just to check and make sure that has been created, you can see we've got that create schema one I did first. We've got that register view one afterwards. So if you're checking and saying, did it actually create? Do I have a store proc? What procs exist? You can use that kind of select star from sys procedure to go see what's actually in there. Alrighty. So let's give this a test. So we've got this register view, which is doing the exact same steps that we've built up. I just want to say, well, I've been lazy. You don't need to type exec. You can type exec. So what does my schema want to be? I'm going to get a new schema it's not seen before. My taxi view is what I want to call it. And then the lake path, the folder path, delta, that's all the same. So I can just run that. And that is going to go and create that NYC schema for me. And then it's going to go add that view. So you can see the two things it did. It created that schema because it didn't already exist. And then it went and found it. It's nice and easy. We can then do a quick, it's already refreshed. You can see that NYC, my taxi view. Cool. And you can add into that as much as you need to. You can add more support for different things. You can add support for creating databases and switching databases. You can add lots of things into that. I'm going to leave you to go crazy and do whatever you need to do. The final step of the puzzle is that's just still doing one view. And I don't want someone sitting here and just typing and calling that proc many, many, many times for each of the different views that we need to do. Again, I've got, in this case, 7, 8 different tables that I need to do. I'm not going to call this proc 8 times. 8 times, far too much work. So what we can actually do is then automate this via things like Data Factory, or in this case, Synapse pipelines. So I'm going to add a new pipeline. And I was going back and forwards in the best way to do this, because I would like in here there to be I want to call my serverless store procs. But actually, if you pull in the SQL pool store proc, it's going to assume that you are doing this on a dedicated SQL pool. There isn't a pull one of your existing serverless SQL pools and call a store proc. Despite the fact that they support store procs, you can't call it from your pipelines currently. So I had to go like a little bit of a roundabout way of doing this. I just said, well, I'll do a normal store proc then. So better than the store procs, this is going to be my create view proc. And then we need to pick where's this coming from. I was having a play around, and you do have this default SQL server baked in, which is a linked service that's created inside of Synapse to kind of talk to itself. And that wanted that DB name. But going through that path and saying, well, actually, does this exist? Is that there? I didn't get anything back for that. So that didn't seem particularly happy. So what I did instead is I said, you know what? I'm going to create a new linked service. I'm going to create a linked service that just goes to a SQL database. Okay. So this is going to be my SQL database. But what I can do is actually point it at the serverless endpoint. So if I go to Synapse knocking around here, I've got that serverless SQL endpoint. And that's essentially the OpenSQL querying route. So I'm like, well, likely just query that. Go query yourself. I'm just going to turn interactive authoring on, so I might actually be able to show you some of this stuff. I'm going to say, well, I'm going to enter it manually. I'm going to tell you where to go and connect. There is my Synapse endpoint. The database name I want you to go and do is that advancing curation. And then the authentication type, you can just use the managed identity. Because we're inside advancing Synapse, it has access to itself, so that's absolutely fine. It can go and talk to itself. And we can go and create that as an object. That means that we can now connect to any of our serverless SQL tools via Synapse, just talking to itself, which is, I know, a weird way around to do things, but we can do it. It works. Okay, so we've got this advancing Synapse Serverless endpoint. And then when this interactive authoring loads, you can't see it currently, is we'll be able to see any of those store procs that we've created. And that gives us that nice next step. We can actually go and create some things. I do have here's one I made earlier. And I didn't save the one I made earlier. Well, there's that. Okay, well, we can just wait for the interactive authoring to load. Because when it does, we'll be able to see the particular store proc under there. We'll be able to see the parameters. And then that gives us the ability to parameterize anything we want. Because we can plug in, we could do a lookup. We could do a quick lookup to a reference database, a config database. We could do a query of anything we want in there, and then plug that into a for each loop. There we go. Okay, so that's enabled. You can see our two different store procs. So we've got that register view store proc is now there because I'm connecting directly to that serverless database. And so we can test that. Because it can see that, we know that connection's worked. It's fine. And then we can import our store proc parameters. There we go. We've got our list of those different parameters. I'll make that easy for you guys to see. Whoop. Okay, and then we can just plug in everything we're doing. So that was going to be Delta, my folder path. I'm going to be lazy and just grab that from my existing folder path. Oh, it's not actually that. Let's go. We're going to go and do one of our curated ones. That was roots. It needed that. Roots, curated. VentureWorks, and then in this case, I'm just going to hard code it to address. Lake account, that was DB Lake. Schema, whatever schema we want. In this case, keep with VentureWorks. And then the view name, what table should it expect because of how we built it, is that address. Those bits and pieces gone together should be what we're expecting. Let me just check the, oh, I do need the slash at the start of root in the way I've written it. Again, you can write it any way you guys want. So doing that, I can then hit debug. And that's going to go off and connect to the lake. Now, because I'm doing it this way, because I'm telling the managed identity to talk to the serverless endpoint, That means it's going to authenticate with the lake as the managed identity. So you need to make sure that your managed identity has developed access to read the folders, read the files, kind of execute on the different folder paths. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to run this thing. So make sure you've got your various different things set up properly. And then you can go and pass it in. So we can say into that proc, we can see how it's passed all those different parameters in. And then we should see in just a moment, it's going queuing because I'm inside a virtual network, so it has to provision the runtime inside the network for it to be able to run. And we'll come back and have a look at that in a sec. But then taking that to the next level, it's just a case of the same way we do all other parameterization in Data Factory. So I would add in a for each loop. So I'd say for each, actually put that stored proc call inside that for each loop, parameterize these things to be going, well, actually, I don't want you to come from address. I want you to be going from the current iterator, and then I want you to be taking that table name. And then from then on, it's just the same as plugging into any other metadata controlled system. So if you've got something that kind of, whatever created those delta tables in the first place, assuming you've got some metadata living somewhere, you can just do a call into that same metadata, pull out that information, put it into a for each loop, and then call this to go through and run each of those different things. So super, super useful, really easy, really flexible. Okay, so we've got an output, so didn't fail. That's good. So what we should be expecting is we should now see, it was just address that we did. So we want to see a table over that curated AdventureWorks address called AdventureWorks.address. That's what we're expecting to see if this has worked properly. So again, let's go into our data. Inside Adventure Curation, let's refresh that. And then there we go, AdventureWorks address. See, it's got all of addresses in there. We can go, I want to do a quick select top 100, go in, have a look at that. And that is a delta table that has been registered with a Synapse Serverless SQL pool programmatically and can be automated. Cool. So that is that. That is all I wanted to show you today because I keep hearing about it. I've heard about people trying to do this, saying, what's the best way to do this? Through MVP channels, through forums, through support on YouTube. Loads of people have been trying to do the same thing as saying, I've got a load of stuff making tables and I've got something to query the tables. How do I make sure they query the same thing? That is one route. Now, admittedly, that's fairly manual, right? I don't want to have to write these synchronization scripts to force the joining up of these things. Apparently, if that's the way it works, that's the way it works. We can build those things and, it's not complex. There's not a huge amount of stuff in there. But I'm hoping that through things like Purview, through things like, eventually kind of Databricks, Unity Catalog, all the interesting automation stuff, all these different ways of curating and cataloging data sources, I would like to come together. I don't want to have to say, well, actually, you make your reference to that thing in my catalog and you make your reference to that thing in the catalog. I'd like to just register the thing once and have it everywhere. So we're definitely not in the ideal state yet, but at least we all have the ability to work around it. We can build in things. We can actually make it realize what it's doing by pushing our own bits of engineering at it. Cool. So loads and loads of things in there. Stored procs inside Serverless SQL Pools. There's tons and tons of use cases for it, and you can just use them as you would any other stored proc, as long as the syntax used inside that stored proc is supported by Serverless SQL. Then you can go nuts and you can build whatever you need to. So use that as a tool at your disposal. It'll be confusing because you can't see that those procs exist unless you query the sys tables, but they're there. You can go nuts, you can have a play and work it out. Registering things, again, be a little bit careful of the fact that it will think everything's a string just because of how schema inference works. It doesn't try and cast everything to the data type, even though Delta is sitting there saying, no, that's not the schema, I've got the schema here. It kind of just ignores it the way serverless works, and it's just going to spat out everything that is a string. So if you want to recast it, you'll need to figure out how you build that into your dynamic SQL to get it into the right structures. But at least you can get to a fairly decent querying state where you can plug this into Power BI, plug it into Tableau, plug it into anything that you want once you've got that proc working and once you've built that bit of automation. Okay, that is today's rant over. As always, thanks for joining me. Let me know down in the comments what you think, and if you found different ways of doing this. Is this solving a problem that you're currently having? As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and catch me next week for more, probably more Sparky stuff, but we'll see how it goes. Cheers.